Picture this. The journey ahead starts here together, and together we can build a brighter future. You are listening to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. Welcome to Illuminating Hope. I'm your host, Tina Johnson, Director of Community Engagement at Hope House. Recently, I had the opportunity to facilitate a meaningful conversation with Missouri House Speaker Dr. Jon Patterson, alongside our Chief Executive Officer, Mary Ann Matheny, and our Chief Operating Officer, Eileen Sheehan. In this episode, we dive into the legislative process, explore how bills and budgets are shaped, and discuss how these decisions impact communities, especially those navigating domestic violence and seeking critical support services. We also talk about the importance of collaboration between policymakers and community organizations to create lasting, meaningful change. Listen in as we talk about turning awareness into action and advocating policies that truly support survivors and strengthen our communities. Dr. Patterson, welcome to the Illuminating Hope podcast. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
First of all, Dr. Patterson, I want to say congratulations on the 2026 Statesman of the Year Award. And I read one of the best parts of the awards banquet is $100,000 was raised for the women legislators of Missouri Scholarship Fund.
Yeah, it was a great honor to receive that from the Missouri Times. I was very honored by that. One of the best things we do in Jeff City, so every year someone gets that award and we all get together. But we really set a goal of raising money at the same time for the women's legislators of Missouri. They award scholarships to girls that want to go to college. And so we were able to raise $100,000. That's the goal I had set, and that was a record. And so what that'll mean is probably 50 young girls across Missouri will be awarded $2,000 scholarships to go to college. That's probably the best thing about the evening and the part that I'll remember, not necessarily getting an award, but to think that a lot of girls are going to be able to have their college tuition help be paid by what we raise. That's great to hear. And then that's also one of the best nights because it's a bipartisan affair. That's one night where we set aside our political differences, Republicans and Democrats, and really just focus on raising money for the girls. That was great.
That's exciting. That is exciting. I was looking at your bio. It says that you are committed to public service through medical missions. I know that a lot of the colleagues that you and I used to work with do medical missions as well.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of the places. It says Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Jordan.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of the things that you were able to accomplish while you were on those mission trips.
Just being a physician and getting to live in the greatest country in the world, in the history of the world, you just have to realize how lucky you are every day. And so I've tried to give back just a little bit. And there are so many physicians and nurses who do way more than I ever have. But to go to a different part of the world where they don't have access to the same kind of health care that we do, and to just volunteer, I always felt like that's the least I could do. The countries I went to were different. In Dominican Republic, there are areas that are very poor, and we just provided general medical care. In Jamaica, I went with Dr. Stanley Height, who was a dentist here in Lee Summit for a lot of years. He did a lot of dental work. I did some of the general medicine. I can't tell you how many teeth he pulled. When he was there, he was a machine. Jordan had the most effect on me because we were treating Syrian refugees who were in one of those UN humanitarian camps, and they were injured by war, and they would bring them to Amman from their camp, and then we would operate on them, and then they would go back. And so you see it on the news, all the Middle East conflict, but when you see the actual people and their faces and injuries, that these are civilians, injuries they have, it really affects you. And I hope to do more someday because I think it's a great way for medical professionals to give back, but it really kind of has informed me in the way I see the legislature. We treat it like it's so important, and it is. The laws that we make, overall, you have to think we still live in the greatest country in the world, and we're all so lucky to be Americans.
Talking a little bit more about legislation, last year you passed 67 bills successfully.
Yeah.
So we're well on our way to probably capping that number this year, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, and a lot of it has to do with domestic violence.
Hmm.
One of them that just passed recently, sitting on the governor's desk, I believe, is
Yeah.
the divorce while pregnant.
Yeah, it's a quirk of Missouri law that I didn't even know about till about 4 years ago when one of the legislators brought it to the attention of the media and all the citizens of this state, is that in Missouri, you couldn't finalize a divorce if you were pregnant. And one of our representatives who had her own experience with divorce and domestic abuse, she shared her story. And it is important that we pass this because there are probably other women out there who can't divorce their abuser if they're pregnant and can't finalize the divorce. So we passed legislation that said if you're pregnant, you can still finalize your divorce. That can't be a condition of it. And so hopefully what will happen is if there are women out there who are wanting to divorce their abuser, start a new life and get away from their abusive situation, that they can do that even if they're pregnant. Because we do know that domestic abuse, one of the times that you're most likely to experience it is while you're pregnant. And so if you're trying to get divorced, and these things are probably more common than we know, this would allow women to finalize that. And it was unanimous. Should have been. The House passed it. The Missouri Senate passed it, which means all it takes now is for the governor to sign it, and I'm sure he will, and it will be the law of the state. And it's the first bill that we passed. It just goes to show you how we prioritize things in Missouri. And again, when you watch the news, it always seems like we're fighting and we're talking about this or that people want to argue about. But on things like this, it's bipartisan. Now we'll just await the governor's signature, and I think that'll happen pretty quick.
Can we talk just for a minute about that process? Because it does seem like there's so much that goes into having something even just get to the House floor for a vote and then to the Senate. Can you talk about kind of the process of how there's an idea and that idea then becomes law?
Yes, it is hard to pass a law, which is a good thing. You don't want 163 representatives and 34 senators coming to Jefferson City with all kinds of great ideas and they become law quickly. So I'll take the divorce bill as an example. Someone offered that bill probably 4 years ago, and it took us 4 years to pass it. So what happens is somebody will offer the idea as a bill, and then it has to be heard in a committee. It has to be voted out of a committee of representatives. Then it has to go to another committee. That has to be voted out by those representatives. And each time what's happening is that they're really taking a look and vetting the legislation. So you have different sets of eyes looking at it. And then after it's passed out of that committee, then it can make it to the floor, which is that big room that you see on TV sometimes, where all 163 legislators can have a chance to vet the bill, talk about it, debate it, add amendments, and then if it passes out of there, then it goes to the other side, and all of that has to happen again. So that when you pass a bill, you can be fairly certain that a lot of different people have looked at it, a lot of people with different viewpoints have looked at it, and each step along the way it can be stopped or changed, so that when you are taking that final vote, you know that a lot of people's representatives and people's senators have looked at it, and hopefully what you're passing is good legislation instead of fast legislation. So someone offered that idea 4 years ago. It wasn't heard in a committee. Then it was heard in a committee next year. Then we voted it out of the House the year after, and it didn't pass the Senate. And then this year we voted it out, and the Senate passed it. It's a long process, but I think that's a much better way to do it than for someone to think of a good idea and then just to pass it, because then you find out all of the unintended consequences of legislation, and sometimes those are worse than the status quo.
Do you know how many bills get submitted every year? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, just in the House. So we have 163 representatives, and if you live in Missouri, one of those people is your representative. And so just in this 2-year term, we've had over 3,000 bills filed.
Oh, wow.
So 3,000 times someone has come to Jeff City and said, I think we should do this. Probably a lot of those people would find aren't good ideas, and people would have different opinions which ones are good and which ones are bad. It's good that we take a really good look at legislation, really vet them, and then only a handful of those bills will pass every year and make it to the governor's desk. So that's just one of the ways that we prevent bad laws from happening.
Well, I think even just to get it assigned to a committee, that's a big hurdle too, it seems like, just to be able to make that process. So
yeah.
It's been interesting. I know Eileen and I have been coming down to Jeff City for probably 20 years.
Yeah.
And have met so many different people, and just I continue to just be like, this process is so complicated that you just really,
yeah.
I know we worked on one concept for over 8 years, and it actually passed. It was the court fees that that are collected.
Yeah.
So we had this great idea of like, okay, let's increase that. That'd be a great way for programs to get some more money. And then the next year, after it passed, it was in law for a year, and then it got overturned, or new legislation came in and changed it. So even when it does become law, doesn't mean it stays that way. Or I think one of the things that we have also seen is that legislation's passed, and then those unintended consequences that you talked about, then you end up going back and making changes because of the unintended consequences that come through.
Yeah.
This specific one, as you know, domestic violence is about power and control.
Yeah.
When somebody finally makes that courageous step to leave that situation and they would like to get divorced, the abusive partner does whatever it takes. And when it has law in place that doesn't allow them to get divorced because they're pregnant, it seems as if the system also is part of the abuser's big scope plan. So this kind of, I believe, is going to be a game changer here for victims of domestic violence.
Good. Yeah, that was one instance where the law worked against the woman.
Which is an unintended consequence, I'm sure.
Right, and so we changed that, and that's why it was a bipartisan vote to get rid of that.
Well, again, and I'm so glad it was unanimous. I do want to talk a little bit about your roles. Talk to our audience about what is it exactly the Speaker of the House does.
Well, like we were talking about, so many bills get filed, so I would think the Speaker has a lot of roles. One is to just kind of be the guardian of the House, which is a job I take very seriously. It's to represent the House, not just the Republicans or the Democrats. I take that role really seriously. And then just the mechanics of passing legislation. I spend a lot of time just reading all the bills. I've read every single member's bills and then picking which ones get sent to a committee. I think that's one of the jobs, the most important jobs. And so I take a look at each one, and you have to decide, do I think it's good? The other factors are, do I think it can pass? Will this have unintended consequences for other things? So I send the bills to committees, and then the chairman of the committees get to choose which bills get heard, and the chairman are the people that I've selected. So that's another one of the roles that I take really seriously. I think we have great chairmen in the Missouri House. All of them are very thoughtful legislators who've had a say in the bills that we've passed. And then the chairman will decide, do we hear the bill? And then that's when you have public testimony and the whole process can get going. So the Speaker does a lot of things in the House. Probably the biggest one is the referral of the bills and then deciding which bills go on the calendar for debate. And then after that, it's up to another person to decide, are we going to do that? And so there's all kinds of checks and balances with the chairs and the majority leaders. And again, it's very hard to have legislation that passes all of the tests. But again, it's a good thing because you'd rather have good vetted legislation than things that we pass very fast and emotionally.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There's already a law that says that, federal law as well as state law that was passed, that gave domestic violence agencies and sexual assault agencies confidentiality. So unless there's a release of information, we cannot confirm or deny if we've ever offered anybody services or currently offering anybody services.
That's great.
Yeah, which is very helpful. And there's lots of great reasons on why we have that. We had our contract lawyer at the time had a case where a judge ruled that we had to go ahead and give up the client's information. And so the lawyer at the time did a motion to quash, and then the case ended up going to the Supreme Court and won that confidentiality is confidentiality, and we did not have to give up those records. So having that law, and then sometimes there's that challenge to the law that you don't really think about either. And then that process is long and daunting as well, as I understand it needs to be. But when you're the victim on the other side of things, that's really scary. And it's nice to be able to have the backing of the law itself, as well as then the attorney who said, oh, no, wait, we don't think so. We're going to take that to Supreme Court.
Yeah, which is why it's so important that we have good legislators. In the news, you hear a lot about Washington, D.C., but the things that affect people's lives, a lot of times, I think more often than not, happen in the state legislative level, in the state courts. So when you have laws like that in place that can really protect people, that's one of the things that we want to hear about and that you see a lot.
Yeah, very fortunate.
We've had instances where abusers have left tracking devices, say in diaper bags or in cars or wherever. And there's the House Bill 1737, the Unlawful Vehicle Tracking Bill. Eileen, do you want to give some instances how this law would benefit our domestic violence survivors?
Again, we've talked about domestic violence, power and control, and when a victim decides that they're leaving that relationship, then that becomes very dangerous for that victim because that abuser is losing their control. So they start to do whatever it takes in order to get the victim back. They start to stalk them, continue stalking them, but everything seems to escalate to a new level. And we've had victims who, then we were helping them with an order of protection, and she said, he says he knows where I am, and he's sending these pictures. Yeah, I had a tracking device on her car that she did not know about. So we had contacted the police, they came out, they couldn't find anything, but her son later was able to get up underneath the car, and somewhere inside the engine portion, he had the tracking device, and they were able to find that. But that's how he knew exactly where the victim was, and was sending text after text after text about, I know where you are, I'm coming there. And of course, we contact the police to make sure everybody's safe. You know, just those kinds of things. And you have to get up underneath the car to put that stalking device there. Then that just tells that person's mindset of what they really are intended and willing to do in order to get that victim back.
Yeah. You know, this is one of the pieces of legislation that I've been interested in, and I researched it. And one of the questions that I'm looking at currently is it already illegal to do? Which I think it is. And then could this be prosecuted under stalking statutes? So this is something that we've discussed for a number of years. And if it needs to be clarified, I think that's one of the best things we could do. But I think in that situation, prosecutors could prosecute them under the current statutes and stalking statutes that we have. But again, if the law is not clear, that's why you have the legislature make it very clear so that it could be prosecuted, just like we talked about with the divorce while pregnant. Yeah, I would hate to see that happening. I think it happens more frequently than not. And I hope under the current statute of legal that they'll be prosecuted.
Yeah, I think it does happen more than not.
And it's so easy.
It is, right, it is so easy. Right. And if you don't know about it, if you're not up on technology, why would you think that? This is just a constant pattern that your abuser's already done, was just to know where you are all the time and be on top of you and just want that constant wanting to know where you are. Stalking is always happening. It's just escalating. So this is just one more thing to be thinking about that you probably didn't. You're just trying to leave the situation.
Right. And for $30, someone can know where you are at all times.
Yes.
Very scary.
I think that's one of the examples of how there can be technology that can be used for the good, but then it also can be used for the negative. We just went to Europe and put an AirTag in our luggage. Well, I was able to see when we landed in Amsterdam that my luggage was still in the United States, 5,000 miles away, whatever it was. Or we use it to make sure our kids are okay, to make sure that our parents who we're trying to take care of are okay. It does seem like those unintended consequences of whether it's a law or just how some things can be so helpful. But then we have those people who can just take that and turn it and use it for their advantage, which then puts somebody else at risk. It also goes back to, people ask us all the time, why doesn't she just leave? Well, she does. She does, or he does, whichever the case is. But the things that those abusers will go to, the lengths that they will go to keep them in their control, continues even after somebody has left the relationship.
These guys have very manipulative personalities, and they can use the technology and the law for all kinds of nefarious purposes. You guys know that better than anyone.
And to your point, Senate Bill 928, the Domestic Violence Omnibus bill that was just heard, it talks about stalking and electronic devices and to modernize the definition of stalking. To your point, I think that there are a lot of overlap to some of the bills, but it's so important to keep those issues at the forefront.
And maybe our stalking laws need to be changed to reflect the technology, but the point of someone being able to unlawfully track you, that's something that we're working on.
That brings up, too, that what's happening in the Senate could mirror what's happening in the House. And so you do have to then bring those two together, and you only have one that ends up on that topic, so you don't have laws that are competing against each other.
And they got to be exactly the same before the governor can sign it.
Right.
And another big thing that we're focused on this year is about the budget, about the VOCA funds that we're lacking this year.
So VOCA starts out as a federal issue. There is a fund at the federal level that there's no taxes. It's a fine-related fund where businesses are prosecuted for whatever law they have broken. They get assigned a fine. That fine then goes into the VOCA fund. That fund has been depleted because several years ago they stopped prosecuting and did deferments, and so then there was no fine attached. Across the country, the agencies, law enforcement, prosecutors, and then nonprofits hours that are serving victims of crime, those needs have still continued to have actually increased. So as that's happened, fewer dollars going in, but dollars still continuing to come out. So what's happened is we've had less dollars coming to the states from the federal government. So many states have experienced dramatic cuts. We've been very fortunate in Missouri that for the last 4 years, the Missouri delegation has passed to put $25 million of state funds into the Department of Social Services for VOCA. So we have not experienced that dramatic cut that some of the other states have, but it's kept us at the same level of funding from 2017. To me, I'd rather be there than what we're facing now, which is the $25 million is not in the budget at this moment. That comes from the governor. We will be looking at massive cuts to agencies, law enforcement, prosecutors, if something isn't done. So I know we've spent some time talking with you about that and how important that is. We really have talked about priorities. Like it is a priority that victims of crime not get pushed to the back and that they need to have services for crimes that had nothing to do with them. It's not their fault that somebody has perpetrated a crime. We're not just looking at domestic violence either. We're looking at sexual assault, child abuse. I mean, many victims of crime are children. And that isn't going to stop even if that money isn't there. Those crimes don't stop. If anything, they're going to get worse. And so we are still going to have victims needing services. We're just going to have fewer resources available to those victims and fewer resources available to law enforcement and to the courts as well.
That's one of the topics that you bring up in terms of the budget. In terms of the legislature, one of the most important things we do, if not the most important, is to fund programs across the state and fund the operations of the state, including our roads, our National Guard, our schools. And one of those are places like Hope House that provide safe havens for victims of abuse. So Missouri has a budget about $55 billion. We raise about 13 to 14 billion just within the state. A lot of the money comes from the federal government, and then it's our job to disperse those funds. There's never enough money to go around, and so we have to prioritize, and budgets are about priorities. And so we want to make sure our schools are funded, our roads are good, that we have law enforcement that are taken care of. But one of the things we need to prioritize are things like Hope House. And so the budget process always starts in the House. They take the governor's recommendation. And these guys, they're some of the hardest working representatives in the state. They're the ones that want to sit in meetings for 8 to 10 hours. And I did this for my first term in the House, and I said, I got to get off. It's because I didn't. And you have to really invest your time in it. Every one of those members is willing to do that. And they have to comb through stacks of the budget, which if you stack them up are taller than most of the members in the House of Representatives. And then they have to decide, are we going to fund this? Are we going to fund that? $25 million goes here. That means $25 million can't go there. And in Missouri, it's not like Washington, D.C. We don't have a credit card. So all the numbers have to balance at the end.
Right.
And then it goes to the Senate after the House passes the budget, and then to the governor. So in terms of passing the budget, when you pass it out of the House, say it's about a third of the way done, because then the senators have to look at it and they have to make it reflect their priorities. And then the House and the Senate have to get together and have to get the same conclusions. And so there's a long way between now and the budget being finalized. And if you have something in the budget that you want to get funded or you think is a priority, there's still a long ways to go, and you'd have to work with the Senate and the House. And I think if a program wasn't funded in the House, it can still be funded in the Senate. And so again, it's a process of checks and balances, and it's a long ways to go. And I would hope that places like Hope House can get funded, and we just have to work with the Senate and the governor's office and the House to see if we can get that done.
And I think it's important to note too that that money doesn't automatically just come to Hope House or to other victim service agencies. We go through a very complex process of writing a grant, having that grant submitted and reviewed, and then they decide how that money is going to be dispersed as well. And they're looking at the entire state and what the services and the needs are. So it's not a given, even with it in the budget, how then that's going to be dispersed out. I think where this comes in, and we, again, the number of times we come down there, is how do you prioritize? Because what's really a priority for us may not be a priority for a lot of the people in the House. So then how do you then, as a body of legislators decide that.
Yeah.
Who decides? Is it just a group decision, or who decides what the priorities are?
The chairman of the budget committees have a lot of say. There are so many priorities because if 25 million goes to this school, that's 25 million that can't go to law enforcement somewhere else. We have $14 billion to disperse, but there are so many schools and law enforcement and domestic violence programs and all kinds of programs around the state that at some point taking from one means you have to do that before another program can get it. Again, it just comes back down to compromise. We all have our programs that we want to get funded, and people just have to get in a room and say, well, maybe it's 12.5 million here and 12.5 million there. That's a lot of the times the way it gets done. But the budget chairmen have a lot of say, and the budget committees have a lot of say. But every member of the House and Senate will vote on the final budget.
There are some bills that you guys have been looking at that I really do want us to talk about.
Yeah.
But I also want to say that it really is important for residents of this state to have a voice, that they do have a voice, that they can call their representatives, they can write them letters, write them emails, come visit. I mean, the Capitol is always full when we come down.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people all the time coming in and talking to you about what their priorities are. So I think it's important that people understand that you do have a voice, you do have a process of having your voice heard as well.
That is probably the most important thing that I've heard here so far is you should know who your state representative is. You should know who your state senator is. You should be able to email them, call them. If I have a constituent call me, I call them back, I listen. I'm always happy to meet with them in the Capitol. For every piece of campaign literature, or we send out directories and mailings and that tells you all the numbers to your state departments, I always just put my cell phone because I want people to be able to call me. And a lot of times even my staff has said, don't do that, don't put your personal stuff. But I've done it since day one, and what I've found is that citizens, they're not calling all the time with every little complaint. The people that call me are very serious. I'm always happy to talk with them, and I'll keep doing that. And citizens in my district have always been very respectful of my privacy and time, but everything that I have just has my home address. And some people even just come to my door. I don't mind that either. People are very respectful of that. I've not had one bad interaction with anybody at the Capitol or calling me if they're one of my constituents. And that should be, probably not every representative or senator wants their cell phone out there, but you should be able to at least email them, call their office, and they should talk with you about issues that matter to them. So if there's a big take-home message from this podcast, know who your state representative is, know who your state senator is, contact them, make sure they know what's important to you, because they don't know until they hear from people back home. The things that I focused on in the legislature, I didn't have my own views of the world, a lot of healthcare things, but I didn't know about domestic violence, other issues. And when you hear it from your constituents, then it starts to register, and that's when you have a good legislature that really is reflective of the people.
And Marianne's talking about calling and having your voice, and it just makes me think about that oftentimes victims, children of abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse that's going on in the home, they don't get to have a voice.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really where our agency comes in, is they don't have that voice. And if we aren't echoing what we know is a problem and that their voice is muffled and oftentimes not heard, that's our responsibility, is to step up and then be that voice.
Yes.
Which is then where we came in with collaboration and working with law enforcement, because we know that that's their job, is to go and take care of the crime, and they can do that. But it's kind of, then what with the victims? How do they get services? How does that connection work? You're not going to get a good prosecution case if a victim doesn't have the right services and the right connections and support. Just listening to this makes me kind of like, right, this is exactly why we all work together.
Yeah.
None of us are okay with what's going on with domestic violence and sexual assault and child abuse. None of that's okay.
Yeah.
And how we've all stepped up together as a collaborative force.
Yeah.
And so I thank you today for coming, and
It's very inspiring.
Okay,
What you guys do is very inspiring, and to be a voice for other people, I think that's what you guys are all about. And then when you do that, that's when at some point you say, well, I want to run for elective office. So that's
Well, now you're getting
that's one of the
carried
things I would encourage people to do is, your guys' heart is in the right place. And at some point, those are the kind of people that say, I want to go to Jeff City, or I want to be on the city council or county legislature and really have a voice. That's how a lot of people got there.
I don't believe I will be one of those people, but I don't think I have the patience to have that. But I do agree that that's how people get interested.
Yeah.
I know we had talked one other time. What brought you from being a surgeon into politics?
Well, I think like you guys are talking about, I had my experiences in medicine and working in healthcare, and I wanted to be a voice for people in Jeff City with a lot of healthcare focus. So I decided at some point we sit in our offices and we talk, and sometimes we complain about how the system is, and at some point you just have to say, well, I think I'm going to run for office and try to be that voice in Jefferson City and try to make some changes. And I think in my 8 years there, I think we've been able to make a lot of positive changes, and some of the legislation that we've talked about today is part of that. But yeah, when you get to Jeff City, you just kind of knew a lot about healthcare from being in it, but you learn about all these other things: education policy, agriculture policy, and we have all kinds of different members that are experts in their field.
Right.
And that's what makes the legislature work.
And really, if you look at domestic violence as power and control, there's also another component to it. And domestic violence is a public health crisis. There's so many things that can attribute to a victim's health and the health of their children.
Yeah.
I think the World Health Organization has said that the number one health issue facing women is domestic violence.
Yeah.
People don't often think of it as a health issue.
Yeah, I think that connection is really, really important. I've done a lot of presentations about that in our community.
Yeah. There's a couple things. One that I wanted to make sure we talked about, and that has to do with kids. So one of the bills that we've passed, we've only passed 3 pieces of legislation that are on the governor's desk. Before we left for our spring recess, we passed another bill between the House and the Senate. That's House Bill 2273. Your listeners can Google that or look at it in the news. But this was really comprehensive sex trafficking legislation that's affecting people, of course. Sex trafficking is sexual violence, but it also affects kids. And one of the things that we've seen an explosion of, especially online, is child sexual grooming. And so this legislation did a lot of things. For one, I think one of the best things is it removed the words child pornography from our statutes. Children cannot consent to being in porn. So now it's listed as child sexual abuse. If you have videos of children engaging in sexual conduct, that's child sexual abuse material. There's legislation in there that punishes child sex grooming, meaning that we can now go after you for grooming, even if it didn't culminate in a sexual act. We stiffened the penalties of that, and we heard heartbreaking stories of children that were groomed. The law is called Evie and Sophie's Law because they were examples of people that were groomed by their Taekwondo instructor, and the instructor was grooming them to move to Florida with him. And so we expanded the penalties for that. Depictions of minors, there's extortion with sexual images or nude images of kids. We stiffened the penalties on that. And we've heard heartbreaking story of a minor who sent a nude image, and then they were extorted and eventually led to suicide of the minor. And so this, again, was bipartisan legislation, really comprehensive in terms of trying to address this problem, and it is now also sitting on the governor's desk. When I left for our spring recess to see that we've passed these bills, it really makes me happy and to know that we're doing things that are meaningful, that will truly make a difference in kids' lives, women's lives, people's lives. That's a great feeling. And then the other issue that I'd bring up for you, which I also think is a public health issue, is children's access to porn. And this is a bill that we've passed out of the House, and it just says, just like Kansas and a number of other states have, if you're going to allow for porn access online, that you have to verify that the person accessing it is 18. So if you went down the street and wanted to buy a magazine, you would have to show ID. If you want to go watch a R-rated movie in the movie theater, you have to show that you're of a certain age. I just think if you're a porn site where this is so accessible to kids, that you should have to verify that age. So that's a bill that we passed out of the House. And it's a public health issue, and we know from studies that the harmful effects that it has on kids, and then the harmful effects that it has on behaviors going forward. I would suggest to you that it is a public health issue. The very least we could do is, if you're got a porn website, make sure the people accessing it are of age to look at that. And so I hope that makes it through the Senate as well, and that gets to the governor's desk.
I think you talked a little bit earlier just how things have changed technology-wise. The things that we all have access to that we take for granted as adults and that we can do, but then the impact that those resources, that availability, definitely have negative consequences, especially for children.
Yeah, it's a great time to be alive because there are so many things available to us, information. I just think about you can study for the ACT online, which my daughter's going to start doing. Those are great parts of technology. But then you look at the dark side of a lot of this harmful information, a lot of the enticement of minors through the internet, child sexual abuse material, pornography that's accessible to kids. That's the negative side of it. Those are some of the things that we're trying to address, but it's very hard because technology moves so fast.
We struggle with that, just with the people that we work with, being able to stay on top of all of the things for them to be aware of. We safety plan with people.
Yeah.
How do you stay safe, especially if you're still in the relationship? I know that I'm old, but man, I can't keep up with half of the stuff
So
that's
much.
going on.
Yeah, and the kids know more than
They do.
adults, and that's,
They do.
they're better at the technology than we are, so that's scary.
One thing I do want to say that I really appreciate is language change in bills,
Yeah.
child sexual abuse,
Yeah.
because if you don't name it, you fail to address it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate that is really getting
Yeah, at our statutes, they won't say child pornography, which, if you really think about it, that makes no sense. That child cannot make porn. It's child sexual abuse.
Exactly. I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Patterson.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate everything that you're doing with the legislator and all your public service.
Thank you.